Welcome, everyone. This is Imagine All the People podcast, where we learn to appreciate our experiences and cherish the bond we have as human beings. I'm your host, Daniel, and today I had the opportunity to talk to Chris, who visited North Korea when he was 30 years old.
I'm Chris. I'm 32 years old, but actually, when I visited North Korea, and by coincidence, when I visited North Korea, it was my 30th birthday. That was not something that I had planned, but it turned out that way. And presently, I'm a graduate student in finance at Texas A&M University.
So, what made you want to visit North Korea in the first place?
It's interesting. I get that, that's the most common question that I get about it. And at first I was kind of surprised by it because to me it was kind of obvious. Oh my gosh, it's North Korea. We hear about it so much in the news, and it's such a bizarre society compared to our own that I thought, it'd be almost kind of obvious why you would want to visit it. But the same bizarre reasons that I wanted to visit to see this unconventional society may also be the main reasons why lots of people don't want to visit it. So,
What sort of perceptions did you have of North Korea, and had any of them changed after you visited the country?
I had done a lot of research beforehand on the country, and they were actually a bit surprised by how much I already knew about their country and how I could have learned that. Um, but so going in, I knew there was this totalitarian society um, where the government essentially has total control over the citizens' lives, hence the word total and totalitarian. Um, and I essentially got what I expected. This highly militaristic, the most militarized country in the world that views the United States as this imperialistic threat, or at least that's what they tell their citizens. Um, Another thing that I was expecting is that they would be very nice to me, and they were, because they want you to come out with a better impression of North Korea, because in part they realize that they're the most hated country in the world, and there's very few avenues for them to get their message out. Now, obviously, their message is highly skewed and not factually accurate um, a lot of the time. Um, and, I don't think I was brainwashed by their propaganda or anything of that sort. But it was a very fascinating trip, and I'm glad I went. But in general, my suspicions of how they would be turned out to be how they were. Though I could see someone who hadn't done as much research on it going in and being surprised to actually be greeted with hospitality.
Mm. That's interesting. But now, do you see this as a feigned hospitality, or did it feel like a genuine hospitality when you were there?
Well, I mean, they genuinely do want tourists, in part because they have very few ways of gathering hard money. But they definitely have an agenda. They want you to come, have a better impression of the country, and therefore they're not entirely truthful, and do present a very positive, of course, impression of their country. It's kind of like going on the Budweiser factory tour. If you're on there, you know that the Budweiser employees are going to put their best foot forward and not say anything critical about the company, and they want you to have a positive impression of the company, and therefore, they're not going to be entirely honest about what they think about working for Budweiser or something. In the same way, they're basically giving you the the company tour. Um, and since everybody works for the government there, it is a company tour, and therefore going in, or at least you should know going in, that they're only going to put their best foot forward and not speak um, too truthfully about that. Now, what was interesting is that prior to going to North Korea, the prior year, um, I had gone to Cuba, which is another totalitarian society, and our guide for that was in private shockingly critical of his own government. Um, but whereas my guides in North Korea were absolutely would not say anything critical um, of their own government. And when you go, they actually give you two guides, regardless of your group size. And part of the reason they do that, I think, is so that one can spy on the other and make sure that they're not bad mouthing the government or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean that's just incredible that you've been to both Cuba and North Korea, and both of which are entirely closed from public eye now. But is there something more than just a personal experience that motivates you to visit these areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. To me, there's a lot of interesting questions about totalitarian societies, like how do they get that way, and why are that way? They get that way, and could that ever be something that could happen in the Western world? Um, and it's interesting to see that to the people who live there, they there's a positive and a negative message to sort of visiting North Korea. The positive one is that people can adapt to anything, and the negative one is that people can adapt to anything. So they've learned to deal with the status quo, and it's just the way that things are. Um, there's the TV show, the Man in the High Castle, um, I believe, and one of the things they show there is that most people just go along with the totalitarian regime. They sort of just adapt to it, and it becomes their new normal, which is kind of disturbing. Now, a big difference though that I noticed about North Korea and Cuba is that the Cubans are in on the joke. They know that their government kind of sucks, um, which is why so many of them try to escape. Whereas in North Korea, they're kept kind of ignorant, or I guess you could almost dare to say blissfully ignorant of the rest of the world, and therefore they don't know that there's a better world to try escaping to. So it's interesting, the border between China and North Korea, it's the Yulu River, I believe, and it's largely unprotected. And actually, during the winter, it freezes over, so they could walk across the border. Yet, shockingly few people try to escape. And I think that in part speaks to the strength of the propaganda. Um, I also think that from going there, you see that as I like to say, nationalism is a much harder drug than communism. I mean, in like communism in Cuba, communism tells people, well, if you give the government all this power, you will be better off. Your material well being will be better off. And then they see that that doesn't actually happen. And therefore, that gives them, they realize that, oh, this communism thing isn't that good. We should try to escape. Whereas with nationalism, you're not promising people a better well-being. You're promising them a purpose in life, a national purpose, and that's a lot harder, I think, psychologically to shake off. So it was very fascinating to compare the two societies and see what they were like, and then of course compare it to our own.
I really have a tough time discerning who has it better off. Those who don't know that there's, a quote unquote better world, or those who don't who know that there's something better. And what's your take on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it kind of does raise kind of a Hollywood, almost Matrix like question about
Mm-hmm.
whether, ignorance is bliss or not. But I would like to think that people would prefer to know the truth. Um, and this may be unrelated, but in general, all things considered, it's better to be a Cuban, I think, than a North Korean. Um, in part because there's a little more tolerance for dissent than there is in North Korea. Um, and their quality of living does seem to be, you know, slightly higher than North Korea.
Mm. Can you tell me a little bit more about the logistics of your trip as a whole? Like, how did you plan everything out, and did you go through a travel agency?
Right, right. Yeah, a question people, asked me was, well, geez, how did you get there? That seems very special and like a hard thing to do. But actually, it's shockingly easy to go there. You just have to arrange it through a tour agency, basically. And there's about three big ones that do this. Now, what I did was something slightly different, which is instead of going on a big tour with, like, say, a group of 20 Westerners, what I did is I arranged a quote unquote private tour. Um, so it was just me. And the reason I did that is that the cost actually wasn't that much more than doing the group tour, but also I had realized from my time in Cuba that the most fascinating part is dealing with the people themselves. And realistically, I knew the only people that I would be able to have much interaction with were the guides or the government minders themselves. Um, and no matter the size of the tour group, there are always two government minders in order for one to look after the other. Um, so by doing it as a private tour, I had lots of interaction with them, and they accompanied me to my meals, and I could talk with them and sort of hear their perspectives of things. And I ended up being very glad that I did it that way, because to me the most fascinating part of the trip was speaking with them, um, and with these people whose job is both to give me the party line, but also show me a good time or try to accommodate as many of my requests as in terms of what I want to see as they can, but while also getting the party line. It was very interesting for me to see who exactly are these people. And as far as I could figure out, the guides, reminders, whatever you want to call them, um, are basically rich kids, or are the children of the North Korean elite. They're usually in their 20s or 30s. And one of my guides, I asked her about her government experience, and her dad was a North or is a North Korean diplomat. Um, and similarly with my other guide, her dad, I think, worked for the transportation department. Um, so in part, that reinforced what I want to do of giving sort of a positive impression of an American and of the United States, especially if their parents are in some sort of position of minor power, um, or something. So maybe they go to their father and be like, "Oh, I toured around this American, and he didn't seem that bad or evil, um, or anything of that sort." Now, normally when you go, um, they always give you a male minder and a female minder. And I had a welcoming gift for them with that in mind. They say like, oh, for the female, you're supposed to give her like a traditional female gift, like a box of chocolates, and for the male, you can give them, a pack of cigarettes because men in North Korea smoke, though the women don't smoke there. So I showed up with chocolates and a pack of cigarettes. But to my surprise, both of the guides I was given were women. Um, and, I remember thinking, oh, Kim Jong Un, do you really think that by having two, pretty women, I can be persuaded that easily to like your country? Because you'd be right. No, I'm kidding. Um, but what was funny is they actually admitted to me later on that is why I had two female minders as opposed to a man and a woman, is they thought that as a solo male traveler, I would appreciate having two, pretty women with me as opposed to, a guy and a girl. And what was funny is that one of them said, "What? Do you have a problem with this?" And it was funny because she's kind of referring to herself as pretty. So um, it was sort of a fascinating thing there that they were very honest about that. And also along the same lines, one thing that the North Koreans are famous for are the Pyongyang traffic girls, which is in Pyongyang, the capital. Instead of having traffic lights, they have these, pretty young women in their early 20s in turquoise dresses, um, direct traffic. And being a Pyongyang traffic girl is like considered a huge honor to be. And I asked them, why have these women directing traffic instead of like traffic lights? And they said, oh, it's for public safety reasons. Most of the drivers here are men, and they will listen to like a pretty woman, but they might not listen to, a traffic light. And I thought it was funny that they were, trying to put this off as as a purely public safety thing, and that they were so honest about using, sex appeal in a way as a weapon, or as a tool. And it was just sort of fascinating to see their honesty with that.
Hmm. And going off that, what were some particularly memorable locations that you saw during your time there?
Yes, a lot were memorable. One thing I did is I asked to see a school. Um, so they took me to an English class, because North Korea actually has a dual language requirement, interestingly enough, for their students. So I went to an English class there, and I was expecting to just see the class, but instead they invited me up to the front of the class to kind of give an impromptu speech or something, or to do a Q&A session with the students there. And it's like, okay, what can I say without getting arrested? And then, very menacingly, you have the portrait of Kim Jong Il like above the blackboard. um, Very much like something you see in a movie. So yeah, we had sort of a Q&A session, and coincidentally, the day I went was my birthday. Um, and one of the things that the North Korean kids asked is, what do Americans get as birthday presents? And I was like, okay, I can't mention, video games or iPhones or any kinds of electronics. So I said like sporting equipment, and a cake, and and I said something else, but I'm forgetting at the moment. And what is interesting is they do apparently have the birthday cake ritual in North Korea as well. And actually that night they surprised me with a birthday cake, which I thought was funny. But again, they want to get you on their good side. Um, and by the way, the movie The Interview basically does give a fairly accurate, in terms of broad terms, as to what it's like to be there. And in particular, what they showed in that movie is that the North Koreans do try to kill you with kindness, in a sense, and with a charm offensive, um, and as opposed to yelling at you, or being mean or something, because they realize that serves their diplomatic interests in terms of winning you over compared to yelling at you. But eventually, though, one thing they do show you usually is and this is actually the title of it, the Victorious Fatherland Liberation War Museum, which is their Korean War museum, where, of course, they fought against us. Um, and with there, you get a very militaristic tour guide that talks about the American imperialists and how if the U.S. ever attacks again, they'll kill us all. Um, and they have the USS Pueblo, which they're very proud of, is a captured U.S. warship, um, actually from the 1960s or 1970s, that they claim strayed into North Korean water. So they boarded this U.S. warship and took the crew hostage and had them write letters confessing to being spies. And in the warship, which they have on display in North Korea as a quote unquote war trophy, as they call it, they do have the written confessions of all of them there. And, I'm sure weren't in any way coerced, being sarcastic. Uh, but yeah, but I mean, eventually they did release the sailors, but they kept the boat as a war trophy. Um, and technically, it's still a U.S. commissioned vessel that's in enemy hands, um, or something. But they're very proud about capturing this warship as a war trophy. Um, and then once you go inside the museum, they show you a propaganda video, um, on who started the Korean War, and that is literally the name of the propaganda video they show. And if you look very hard on YouTube, you can actually find it. Um, and of course, the answer in the documentary, and the answer they want you to believe, is that the U.S. started the Korean War. And they desperately want you to believe that the U.S. started the Korean War because whoever started the war effectively lost, in that nothing really changed after the war. The boundaries, were still the 38th parallel, dividing the North and the South, and it just wound up in this stalemate. So effectively, whoever started the war, lost the war. So they very much want to convince you that the U.S. started the war, when in reality, if you talk to any historian in the rest of the world, they will tell you that no, the war started when Kim Il Sung invaded the South, and then the United Nations responded to repel the invasion. But they actually asked me, this North Korean soldier they had there actually asked me, so after the video, so who started the Korean War? And it's like, okay, I'm in North Korea and I have a soldier asking me who started the Korean War. So I think I said no comment. And fortunately, that appeared to fly. He dropped the issue. Fortunately. Yeah.
And while you were touring, did you have a set plan each day, or were you able to just kind of go around wherever you were requested?
Well, we arranged an agenda in the first place, or a schedule, uh, but at times they would change the schedule for whatever reason. Um, Normally, when you visit North Korea, the first thing they show you is some giant statues of uh, Kim Il Sung and Kim Jong Il that they have commemorating them, these giant bronze statues. But I noticed they didn't have me do that. Um, and I think it was because it was under renovation or something. But yeah, sometimes the itinerary would change on me and they wouldn't tell me why. And of course, I didn't really argue about it as I didn't have much in the way of leverage. But there was a general itinerary that we set out. And for the most part, we followed it. Like, I did want to see a school and the War Museum, and all that.
Hmm. Can you tell me a little bit more about where you stayed and what you ate, and what was the hospitality like there?
Yeah. I forget the exact name of the hotel, but it's essentially the most famous one they have there. Uh, it's on an island, um, a man made island with a single bridge connecting it to the rest of Pyongyang. So, and it does have many sort of tourist amenities in there. So some journalists have called it the Alcatraz of fun, in that you're basically stuck on this island and you can't go anywhere else without your minders or guides present. Um, and actually, they have this blue line that is outside the hotel, and you're not supposed to cross the blue line. Um, uh, and of course, I didn't test that. But the hotel is actually the only place where you're allowed to travel around and explore, unaccompanied. Um, and it is one of their nicest hotels, but by, of course, American standards, it's not a very good hotel. Um, the TV they had in my room actually broke, um, on me, and there was a short power outage as well once. So it is very much a poor third world country. Um, just something I think we sometimes forget with all their posturing with nuclear weapons and all. Still, it's an extremely poor country. Um, the In terms of food, though, uh, it it was surprisingly good. Though, of course, they're only having you taste their best food. Um, but one thing they very much wanted me to try is kind of their traditional dish, or kind of the dish that they're known for, and is has a lot of special meaning to them, which is cold noodles. And it's these cold black noodles, maybe I think made out of buckwheat or something, or they have buckwheat in it. I could be wrong. That are in this cold soup, and you're actually supposed to slurp them, which I found kind of funny. And it's kind of their traditional dish, and it's what they serve at weddings and the like. So I tried it, and frankly, I didn't really like it, but the rest of the food they served was very good. Uh, in particular, they had this one dish called ginseng chicken that takes them like 2 hours to prepare ahead of time, and it was like the best chicken that I had, in my life, actually. Um, so the food they give tourists is very good, and the other thing is they try to feed you lots of food. The kind of like, oh, look at all the food we have. Don't worry, we have tons of food. Um, so they do ply you with food. So as a tourist, you won't go hungry there. Um, as part of the charm offensive, uh, that they do. Um, and there was they don't have, they don't have much in the way of dairy, uh, or steak or anything like that. Normally, the meat entree is some sort of poultry. Um, one of the things that I could have tried, but I didn't, was dog soup. Um, I could have actually ordered that somewhere, but I didn't do that. Um, the but yeah, the food that they give tourists is surprisingly good.
Hmm. And with music, were you able to listen to whatever music you brought along?
Yes, North Korea actually has a government approved pop group called, I believe, the Moranbong group. Um, I'm probably mispronouncing the name or something, but it's it's this all female group, and it's interesting because the music, and again, on it's on YouTube. You can actually find this band if you want. It it sounds a lot like the Trans Siberian Orchestra, or it's kind of interesting. It's like a mixture of rock, techno, and orchestral music all in one. So it's very epic sounding. Um, it also sometimes has like a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical feel to it. So it's actually surprisingly catchy, the music that they have, and it's definitely worth a listen on YouTube, because it is kind of funny how over the top the music can be. And of course, a lot of the lyrics in some of these songs are praising the dear leader, um, Kim Jong Un, and talking about how great their leaders are, and and everything of that sort.
Hmm. And I love that picture you painted where you stood up in a classroom and these kids began asking you questions about your life here in America. Now, was propaganda widespread as we see it sort of portrayed in the media? And what role do you think that might play psychologically in the citizens?
Yeah, yeah. Well, certainly in Pyongyang, propaganda is everywhere. They don't have advertising like we do in the U.S. So instead, it's government propaganda. Um, and that's actually, there's the technical name for the style of the propaganda is socialist realism. Um, but it is very over the top. And what's funny is you could buy postcards with the propaganda on it, and a lot of the propaganda and what you could buy on postcards was, North Koreans, destroying American soldiers. Um, there was one of like a missile like crushing a U.S. soldier. Another one that I found sort of weird, where a North Korean soldier was stepping on top of a U.S. soldier while like ringing a cowbell or something. So the propaganda is so over the top, and Americans in it are basically cast as evil or as cowards, um, in a sense. Uh, well, in more than a sense, but um, so it is essentially more or less, I think, what most people expect: very anti-American and very pro the leader. Um, I bought a newspaper there, and I forget. Oh, I have it somewhere, but I forget the headline. But it was like, Kim Jong Un supervises a tank testing ritual, and it has him there looking all proud, like a proud papa, smiling, with the soldiers, and it talks about how great leader Kim Jong Un oversaw a tank testing re- regiment, and he was very pleased with the result. He's depicted in North Korean propaganda as like this proud papa, or
Hmm.
this proud father to the people, um, which is why in a lot of the propaganda, you see him and his, family members, the prior rulers, smiling a lot, which is, very different from sort of the Stalin or Lenin propaganda you'd saw from the
Mm.
Soviet Union. To have these people smiling because they're like the proud father image. Um, and I think we sometimes tend to forget that while Kim Jong Un is a ruthless dictator, even ruthless dictators are politicians. They're out there kissing babies and giving speeches and other things to try to win support of people, because at the end of the day they still are one man, flesh and blood, and could be assassinated or something. Um, so it was interesting to see that. And then on the airplane on the way over, um, they had propaganda you could read,
Mm-hmm.
um, as the in-flight entertainment. They also had the band I was mentioning playing on the entertainment system, or on the
Mm-hmm.
TV they had in the airplane. Um, and it's the only the airline that they have there. I think it's called, or pronounced, Air Koryu. It's the only 1-star rated airline on Skytrax, which is like an airline review site. But frankly, I've been on American carriers that are worse, or I've been on worse flights with some U.S. carriers than that. Um, and yeah, we were talking about food earlier. They actually do serve you food on the flight. It's a 90-minute flight from Beijing to North Korea, and but it's this mystery meat burger that they serve you, and it was absolutely disgusting. Um, and I couldn't eat it. So that was definitely the worst food that I had in my trip to North Korea. But fortunately, it was all uphill from there.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, okay, I'll just skip this meal. And you have no idea what the mystery meat burger is made out of. So it tasted disgusting. So I was like, all right, I'll skip this.
Obviously, we know that you were probably very cautious about having these discussions about politics there. But were there any instances where you did have these political conversations with the citizens in North Korea?
Yes, I did, and that was actually my favorite part of it. Is on, I got to see the military border between the DMZ, the border between North Korea and South Korea,
Mm-hmm.
but that's about a 2.5 hour drive from Pyongyang. So we did that drive. We had a road trip in a sense, and that gave me some time to speak with my North Korean guides about things. And we actually did get to politics. And one thing people have asked me is, how did you discuss politics with them without winding up in a prison camp or something? And the answer is, I was very diplomatic about it. I would say, there's a perception in the West, or a perception in the United States, about this and this and this. Can you comment on that? Or what do you think of that? And I think they could also tell that I genuinely did want to hear their opinions, that um, I was sincere about that. Um, and so one of the things that we talked about, or what they said to me, is, "Oh, don't worry, we don't hate you. We hate your government. We hate the United States government." And the question, of course, is why. And what they say is, well, you put all these sanctions on us, all these crippling economic sanctions. Um, and what I said in the most diplomatic way I could is, well, it's because of the nuclear weapons development, and to disincentivize, your country from developing nuclear weapons. And what they told me um, was, well, Chris, we need nuclear weapons because we're surrounded by all these great powers. We have China to our north and west. We have Russia to our north. We have the United States basically to our south and South Korea, and then we have the Japanese to our east. So we're surrounded by all these great, powerful countries, and we live in this strategically geographically important position on a peninsula. So we need nuclear weapons to defend ourselves um, from all of these countries, and that's kind of the party line that they gave me. But oh, don't worry, we won't use them unless you or someone else attacks us, in which case we will definitely use them and kill you all. But as long as you don't attack us, we won't use them, so don't worry about it. But the uh, but yeah, that was basically sort of the uh, main thing that we talked about. They were also, though, very curious about the United States themselves. So, I had my iPhone with me, and they did ask to see like pictures of the U.S. Um, once they got to know me more. So I showed them, pictures of the United States, which I was depressed I didn't have more pictures of the U.S. on my phone,
Mm.
because the most common picture I take on my phone is receipts in order to file like expense reports and that kind of thing, um, because they are genuinely curious, even if they don't know or can't know what the rest of the world is like. Um, and I did hope that as I built rapport with them, and that they, as I built rapport with them, and as they came to see me as less of a threat, or see that I wasn't going to do anything that would get them in trouble, that they would be more honest with me and sort of forthcoming um, about the country. And there may have been a little of that, and I think it helped put them at ease to like ask me to see what the U.S. looks like. Um, Another thing I asked them about is, or what I told them is, part of the reason people in the Western world or in the rest of the world have such a critical view, I put it very diplomatically, about your country, is that the people who leave your country, tell us about all these awful things you are doing, or I might have said you are allegedly doing. So that's why we have this negative impression of your country, is from people who have fled it. Um, and what they said to me is, well, who does that? What kind of person badmouths their former country? It must be that they're an immoral, bad person, as opposed to what our country is doing. And it kind of reminded me of the Church of Scientology's line when they get asked the same thing as well. Part of the reason why we think all these negative things about your religion is we hear all these horrible things from former members of your religion, and their response is almost always, oh, it's that this person who's saying negative things is immoral, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not that we're doing anything wrong. Um, so that's kind of the propaganda line they give you. Now, I do think that because North Korea is such a class-based society, and that, as far as I could tell, the government guides are basically, as I said, rich kids, that they might not know themselves the full extent of the despair, or they, as the tour company that arranged it for me said, they don't know about the concentration camps or anything like that. They're kind of, if you're in Pyongyang and sort of the part of the elite, you don't get to see the negative parts of the country as much, um, or you might be sheltered from the more negative aspects of it. So I do think that my guides genuinely didn't know about a lot of the horrific stuff that their country has done or is doing, and therefore, in their minds, maybe aren't entirely lying to me with this line of, "Oh, it's these
Mm-hmm.
the people who leave here are immoral, and they're saying crazy accusations about us that aren't true." That they might, due to their sheltered position in life, genuinely believe that.
Mm-hmm. No, Chris. With your experience with totalitarian regimes, and obviously this is a highly debated topic, but do you think what is happening in North Korea and Cuba might actually happen here in the United States?
Well, um, I don't think that we are totally immune to it, and you kind of see that, in a sense, the country is like a cult. Um, and obviously, in the U.S., we've seen different cults, and that very reasonable people can fall susceptible to them. I think what the North Korea does, the government does in part, through its nationalist rhetoric, um, and some of the communist rhetoric as well, is give people a sense of purpose, in their life. And sort of, we are these courageous people standing against this incredibly wealthy and powerful country in the US. And it's our purpose in life to defend the homeland, to defend our leader, and to defend our sovereignty. Um, so, I think that's in part what Hitler did, was give the German people, sort of have them feel proud of their country and have them feel, um, yeah, a nationalistic pride, and that they were part of a common purpose. And we've seen that, through cult leaders and through different dictators, and as in the case with Hitler, he was a dictator in the Western world. Um, People aren't immune to that. I mean, Germany was a democracy before Hitler rose to power, and he was democratically elected at first as chancellor before the parliament there voted to give him absolute power. Um, so I do think there's a warning that it's not, that we shouldn't think that we are somehow not susceptible to ever becoming a totalitarian regime, or that we are not at all susceptible to nationalism or communism or something of that. And that we should take a step back before embracing any sort of radical ideology, and and realize that, it can be difficult to stand up against sort of that cult feeling. Um, Madeline Albright, in her book, her book was called "Fascism: A Warning." Sort of says that there is a human impulse, for freedom, but there is also a human impulse to obey, to want to obey this higher authority that will make their lives better, or that they think has special powers or something. And I think the North Korean government does, um, a diabolically good and sinister job of convincing the people that if they give all their liberty to Kim Jong Un, he will protect them and is tirelessly working to make their lives better. And that's what a lot of the propaganda songs are about, is how, Kim Jong Un is thinking only of his people and how to make their lives better, and he does all this courageous and make stuff for us and makes all these sacrifices for us. So we should support him. Um, though, of course, we know from Dennis Rodman that apparently he has crazy parties on on like a yacht with lots of booze, while the rest of the people in the country, suffer. Um, but I think one of the mistakes, though, we make when talking about North Korea is we talk about, a crazy dictator, crazy. And I don't think the North Korean regime is crazy. I just think it's an evil regime. And you can be rational and evil at the same time. There's kind of a diabolical brilliance to their system, um, and to a sense how they manipulate the rest of their world, the rest of the world. And in a sense, I think they almost, though, want us to think that they are crazy, or in a fit of rage, they might launch the nuclear weapons or something, precisely to deter us from ever pissing them off. Um, and I think in some sense it's been working, or it's worked. We've always kind of backed down whenever they've agitated, to avoid war. But I don't think Kim Jong Un would actually launch nuclear weapons in a fit of rage. I think he wants people to think he will, and therefore, have more power or more influence. That was kind of the doctrine Nixon had during the Cold War, is, oh, I want the Soviets to think I'm crazy and might, in a fit of rage, do something, so that they'll do what I want and help me end the Vietnam War. Tell the Vietnamese, you have to end this war, or else crazy Nixon is going to go nuts and nuke us all. Um, so it is kind of a diplomatic position, to do it. But I think he's a very shrewd leader, and we've underestimated the North Koreans, and that's why they've essentially, in a sense, won these past 50 years, in part by scaring us, and then always having us back down, um, in a sense.
And now back to when you mentioned the instance of talking about politics with your tour guide. And sort of a common string that runs through all of my podcasts is the shared human experience. And with your encounter with your tour guide, in the end, do you think that people will still be people, and maybe our countries might strive for sort of some understanding within one another?
Yeah, I do. And again, I think they do genuinely believe a lot of the propaganda they're told is true. Um, as I said, sort of a difference between the Cubans and the North Koreans is that the Cubans are in on the joke. they realize that their government is bad, whereas the North Koreans, I think, they've done such a good job, which is amazing with the internet nowadays, of keeping their people walled off from information on the outside world. Now, apparently, I've heard that the guides, the minders, are like allowed to watch the World Cup, or like Frozen or something, so that they can kind of understand more the psychology of the people that they're guiding around their country. But I still think that they're largely kept in the dark. When I tell people I've been to North Korea, a lot of times what they sort of say is, "Oh my God, this guy was crazy. What a crazy risk to go there." And I did do a lot of research ahead of time on sort of the risks of going there. And what kind of persuaded me that it would be a relatively safe thing to do is that in a typical year, they get about 8,000 Western tourists, including 1,000 Americans. And in the past 10 years, only I think about 19 Americans have run into trouble. So the odds of something bad happening were relatively low. And also, they do want tourists to come. Um, so arresting tourists isn't exactly in their best interests in terms of incentivizing tourism. Of course, my safety was something that I was very concerned about when planning this, so I talked a lot with the tour company about it. And what they told me, and it was basically true, is that there's a difference between violating a rule and a guideline. They don't expect you to know all their laws, um, but they do expect you, once they tell you their laws, to listen to them. So the main thing that has gotten American tourists in trouble is proselytizing Christianity. Um, if you look at most of the people there who've gotten in trouble, that is what they've gotten in trouble for. And they tell you when you go there, please keep any religious opinions to yourself, or don't distribute any religious material. And actually, when you go through security and entering the country, they look through your luggage to make sure you're not carrying any religious material or anything like that. Because the official line is that Kim Jong-un is basically God and is divine. In a sense, he's kind of a pharaoh, is what I kind of think about it. And the Bible and the Quran and other religious texts are usually very anti-pharaoh and anti people claiming to be divine and over the Lord. So, another thing that your listeners, I should probably tell them, is that as of, I believe, September of 2017, Americans are no longer allowed to go under U.S. law. The U.S. government forbid it. So I was glad I could still get in when I could. Mm-hmm. And it was I visited in April of 2017, and it was actually a fascinating time to visit in that it was kind of a low point in U.S.-North Korean relationships, which had me kind of more scared going in, is that through that month of April, just the U.S.-North Korean relationship just plummeted. And they actually told me upon arriving that, they were like expecting some large group of Americans, but suddenly they all like canceled on them. But I didn't cancel, and they were glad that I didn't cancel on them. And I was like, oh, great, am I the village idiot or something? But, nothing bad happened. And once I was in the country, it was less stressful than the night before in Beijing, thinking about that. Once you're there and you meet them and you see they basically, want you to have a pleasant time and see their propaganda, and that as long as you don't violate their rules, which they kind of give you the overall lay of the land when you first arrive, that you will almost certainly be okay. So yeah, overall it was a fascinating experience, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with North Korea in the future, and hopefully the country will we can only hope become more free over time, though unfortunately that may not happen for quite a long time.
Yeah, definitely. All right, thank you so much, Chris, for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel, for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for listening to Imagine All the People podcast. This was Chris, and we hope you will join us for the next episode.